Okay, so good afternoon, and thank you for still being with us after the lunch break and the last afternoon in our conference. It's about responsible gambling during our panel about the latest trends and developments in responsible gambling. And as you all know, things happen quicker than one can sometimes adapt new rules. I have with me two renowned experts in this field. Bill J. Pascrell III, better known as PP3, and he just recently told me that people really call him PP3. Not Bill, but PP3. He is the partner, as he mentioned this morning already, at Princeton Public Affairs Group, and he has worked in public policy for many, many years. He also worked with congressmen in the past, and he comes from a family which is very closely connected to politics in the US. And he is also working with online gambling for many years and has advised big international operators who are active in the US and in Europe. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you.
And we also speak with Dan Iliovici. That's correct?
Yes, perfect.
Dan is the vice president of the Romanian trade association Rombat, and he is also an advocate for responsible gambling, has always been. And we will hear about what he can tell us also about the Romanian market a little bit later. But I'd like to start with Bill. Bill, you are someone who is in the industry for over 10 years. You have followed all the developments in Europe and the US. And so that's a question that really interests me personally as well. We've seen in the last 5 years in Europe that all responsible gambling provisions are tightening, even regulators continue inventing rules we've never seen before. When we look, for instance, at Germany with the strange cool-down periods and many other provisions we've never seen before. And also in regard to advertising, we see more and more restrictions. Started with the ban in Italy, 2019, and recently also Holland and Belgium already announced nearly bans. Now, do you see this trend in the US already as well, that those rules are getting tighter and tighter, or do you say, no, we are still too early in the process?
Anne-Marie, thank you very much. Zoltan, thank you for having me. Dan, always a pleasure. The last time I did a panel on RG, I was driving in my car, and Dan and I were kibitzing, so it's good to be here in person. Thank you for coming after lunch. Anne-Marie, if you'll permit me, let me answer the question in a couple of ways. Other than becoming a dad, my 4 children who range from ages 30 to 8 years old. Aria Leah just turned 8 yesterday, and I'm here, so we had her Harry Potter party on Saturday. That's the proudest moment in my life, but the second proudest moment in my life, and permit me if you will, was when I was asked by Shai Segev, Rob Hoskins, and it was endorsed by Yetta when she came on board after Shai left to go to Dansk, Martin Lichka, when they asked me to join Entain's foundation for RG. Very, very proud moment. My children said to me, wait a second, Dad. You represent all those dodgy gaming companies across the globe, taking everybody's money, and now you're talking about responsible gaming? How the heck is that? What the heck is that? So I had been involved for many, many years on the Federal Affairs Council for the US NCPG, National Council Problem Gambling. It's a great organization, well-intentioned. But to be honest, they haven't accomplished much. They try, but they have not accomplished much. My job in life, there's 3 times of lawyers, losers, grinders, and minders, people who get things done. I am not the brightest ship in the port, nor am I the sharpest tool in the toolbox, but nobody's gonna outwork me. I know my limitations. What's happening in Europe, and has been happening, in many jurisdictions that Anne Marie so eloquently pointed out, is coming across the pond. And it's coming quickly. I think that companies like Rush and Kindred and Entain and others are smart to get ahead of the curve, forcefully trying to do self-regulation. If America, online gaming, treats their gambling-addicted customers like the brick-and-mortar retail industry did for decades in America, because that's where I came from, retail brick-and-mortar casinos in Vegas and Atlantic City and Connecticut and Pennsylvania and so on and so forth. How did they treat the gambling-addicted customer? As their VIP. They could care less whether these people had problems. And they would play on them. Bill Pascrell has a problem. We see he's like spending double, 3, 4 times what he's doing. So let's throw more bets at him. Let's give him a marker. If the US online gaming industry treats their players that way, we're doomed for failure. So what's happened? I talked about it a little earlier, just in a teaser. Congressman Tonka, who's a Democrat, has introduced a bill to ban advertising in the federal US House of Representatives. Now, fortunately, as I said, that bill's probably not going to see the light of day for the next year and a half while the Democrats are in the minority. But the industry oftentimes isn't sophisticated enough to understand that bill may not become law, but it's incentivizing regulators to explore banning, like we're seeing in states like Massachusetts, banning affiliates, considering banning advertising. That's not the solution. The solution is for us to be mindful. The only way to create a sustainable gaming industry in any jurisdiction is to stay ahead of the curve on 3 verticals. Trying to make sure you're working collaboratively with regulators. Working with regulators, I work with a lot of affiliates who give me brown paper bags of information that I drop off at regulatory offices to tramp down on black market. And the third piece is RG. Here's the challenge with RG in America. These companies are not profitable, clearly, and other people have endorsed that. Claire, previously Osborne. And they're not going to be profitable in the near future. But the RG people in each of these operator companies are competing with the RevPsych people. The RevPsych people don't want to hear, well, we have to slow down, we have to do pauses, we have to do other verticals for player protection. The RevPsych people don't care about tomorrow. They care about today. And when CEOs like Yetta and others in the industry continue to show leadership on RG, that's where we create a more sustainable industry. Can you imagine now in a non-profitable sports betting industry in America for online and brick and mortar, if the regulators start to clamp down harder? But I think the regulators so far in America, we haven't seen the huge trampoline effect, have been moderately moving forward. And again, our job is to educate before we advocate.
So I take it that it's really positive that especially those international operators really look at all markets and try to also harmonize via their initiatives the framework for those aspects that are changing so quickly in so many jurisdictions. Then, I mean, Romania is one of the first jurisdiction in Eastern Europe that included online gambling to the law. And interestingly, I remember at the time, you already introduced many elements that are only lately a point of discussion in other jurisdictions, such as BSP blocking, but also B2B licensing, a very rigorous at the time KYC process, and you already have also such provisions like restrictions for individualized advertising. What's your experience over the years? Did it pay off to already introduce all those provisions very early in the process?
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Zoltan. Well, regulating from the very beginning, putting some provisions regarding responsible gambling in the regulation, even before the first online operator have been licensed, it was a very good thing. In Romania, we also have a so-called second-class license for the payment processors, for testing labs, for software and manufacturers for the gambling industry. And having this second-class license is also a very good thing in perspective of making them more responsible. It's not like in UK where the operator is responsible for what the, let's say, the affiliates are doing. In Romania, even the affiliates have to have a second-class license. So coming back to responsible gambling provisions, there was a good start, and then people took this as a bare minimum. And it took some years before, as Bill said, as William said, large operators understood and started to promote self-regulation and raised up the barrier and introduced their own responsible gambling limits, instruments, projects, and so on. A part of being vice president at the Responsible Gambling, at the Rombet Association, an industry body association, I'm also vice president at the Responsible Gambling Association. It's exactly this is the name in Romanian. And we are doing since 5 years a lot of projects in order to educate, to prevent, and to treat problem gamblers and addiction. We explained, and we currently all the time going to the regulator, showing them what we are doing. They are not all the time very confident that we are honest in what we are well-intended, but showing them figures, showing them exactly what kind of projects we do have, and have to say that everything is funded by the industry. This might be also a sign of question for the operator, for the regulator, that we are really pushing this ahead, because as Bill said, you cannot be in two boats at once. Yes, on one hand, you want to attract as many customers as possible, to keep them as long as possible, and to take as much money as possible from them. And on the other hand, to promote education, to promote self-regulation, to promote limits. And if there are some unfortunate cases of problem gamblers or even severe addiction problems, to start to stop them playing further. So these two have to stay in balance. And big operators, as Bill said, have a deep understanding of this issue.
You mentioned those facts and figures, and I think, and everybody in the industry promotes always this evidence-based approach. Bill, especially UK is one of the role models when it comes to online gambling regulation for many reasons. For cultural reasons, for the fact that they already regulated back in 2005. They've got a lot of experience, and they do, in fact, also not only from the industry side, but also UK does a lot of studies from the regulator side, from also different interest groups. And what is interesting, despite the fact that we have also in UK over 100 licenses for online gambling, the prevalence rate, also a recent study showed that remains extremely stable and low. At the same time, we hear everywhere and all the time from the regulator, from advocacy groups, the industry has still to invest more in all those initiatives when it comes to therapies and so on. And there are also very detailed studies, for instance, about the correlation between the suicide rate and problematic gambling behavior, or the correlation between low-income households and gambling harm. Now, they say then more specifically, yeah, there we have a problem. But what's your stance, how to best tackle these extremes, these two extremes? Is it to invest even more in early detection? Is it in investing more in education? Is it in investing more in therapy institutions? What's your thought about that?
Thank you, Anne-Marie. A couple of thoughts on that question. First of all, I think it's important to provide this detail. One of the responsibilities I have, you know, as I said earlier, I've been representing GVC now for 13 years. GVC Entain now. I never could get the Entain name, but it's not a familiar brand in America. It's still not, right? People know BetMGM, but they don't know who the two legs are on the stool, and that's a work in progress. And it's hard. They know FanDuel and DraftKings and Caesars because they're US brands. But what Entain's done is a lot of folks in any industry provide lip service. This is not lip service. Because in addition to paying me, not only to do licensing and regulatory affairs and work, I'm being paid by the foundation to advocate for RG in many respects across the globe. Martin Litchgate and I, the head of regulatory affairs for Entain, and I have a task this year by Rob Hoskins and Yetta to go to all 36 regulated jurisdictions in the US, one-on-one, not Zooms, flying in and meeting with the regulators to talk about a couple of things. So we've done a dozen already this year, and we have another 24 to go. So what do we talk about? We talk about something that Anne-Marie and Dan have been advocating and doing, not just talking, for a long time. And that is research-based, academic research-based information to provide real data analytics to regulators. So we've done a study with UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, in their RG Institute. We've done a study paid for by Entain, by the way, with Harvard Medical School, which we talked about earlier. We're now in the middle of doing a 3-year study with Rutgers University, my undergraduate alma mater. That's important. That information comes in. It allows Entain to improve their ARC technology. ARC is a sort of player protection data analytics tool that they utilize with 86 different data analytics to slow down play. Dan made a very good point, and Anne-Marie also buttressed it. This is not about necessarily therapy, because if we get to therapy, we failed. Obviously, we have to have good therapy. It's about education and prevention. It's not putting a 1-800 number for problem gambling on your website, checking a box and moving on. That accomplishes nothing. And by the way, I'm embarrassed to share with you, there's not a lot behind those 1-800 numbers. It really isn't. Low-paying people, not very well educated, and not passionate about what they're doing. This has to be treated in America like drugs and alcohol addiction, right? And also, I loved what you said on our couple of calls, and as we've gone to know each other over the last month or two, it's incredible how we always, as governments, try to push responsibility off. You gotta take some responsibility. Parents, take responsibility. you have to educate your children. Government can't provide all the answers. But the worst thing we can do is hurt the non-addicted gambler, turn them off, and what we're going to do is drive them to the black market.
And that's exactly, in principle, really based on data, because the prevalence is low. So we need to really tackle those who are exposed to higher risk, and that's we are getting done via early detection, exactly.
Yeah, and Marie, by the way, we know there's, and this is like almost axiomatic across all jurisdictions. We know that veterans and people in the military and police and firemen are very vulnerable to gambling addiction, more so than the general population. We also know that younger people are vulnerable. So we're working with the military in the US. I represent the police and fire unions in America. We're working with them, not charging them, educating them to help their members. Because if 5% of their members go away, they got a problem, right? And don't forget, the regulators work for governments. If those governments have to start putting more money in their budget to pay for gambling addiction therapy, they're gonna come at us as an industry. So in addition to those studies, we're working with an organization, which I know you're familiar with, out of the UK, called Epic Risk Management. Full disclosure, they're a client of mine. I advocate for them with the banking industry. And I advocate for them with the financial institutions industry and gambling operators. But what I'm doing currently is bringing them into locker rooms at the professional level. They're working with the NFL, the NBA, Major League Soccer. We're about to sign a deal with the NHL. Those will all be announced, and that's wonderful. Being funded substantially again by the Entain Foundation. But we're also going into collegiate locker rooms. And we're working with a very interesting vertical. There is an organization in the US just started. It's what I would call a super affiliate. It's called My Wager Score. In America, to get a home mortgage, you need to have a credit score. That enables you to get a bank mortgage on your home. Well, My Wager Score, no charge, it's a free application. You put it on and it tracks your play and says, hey, Bill, by the way, you're now creeping into problem areas. Slow it down, dial it back, understand if you need some help. That's a good thing. And Charles Oakley, the former New York Knickerbocker NBA superstar, he's retired from the NBA, is a part of that organization. So he comes into the locker rooms with us at the collegiate level where the players know who he is, so he can talk about his lived experience. Those are important pieces of a puzzle to build. Entain's not the only organization doing it. If you look at Kindred, they're doing a lot. And Rush, they're doing a lot in the space. And Martin Litschka was able to assemble 8 of the largest operators in America. We know we have over 40 licensed operators. The top 8 have signed on principles of RG. And what we said to them is this is not lip service. It's not putting a click on your consumer-facing page. It's really doubling down and trying to invest so we can create that sustainable, elegant industry we're all hoping for.
If I may, I would like to add just 2 things regarding the evidence-based measures. First of all is how these academic researches are done. And in my conclusion, from my experience, they have to understand exactly what is gambling. Even I advise them to go and gamble, yes, in order to understand how it works. And the second one, which raises a lot of questions and eyeballs from regulators, from the general public, is who's paying for these studies. Because if the industry is paying, immediately everybody will say that, no, this is bullshit and it's done for our misleading our, thank you.
But it's always someone paying for a study. Either it's the state or the private industry. You never get a totally neutral study out. So I think the only thing is, of course, we can do it simultaneously, that we have different approaches, or the industry does it together with the regulator, yeah, in my view would be ideal, yeah. I want to quickly, we do not have so much time anymore, quickly tackle two topics. One is advertising, and the second is the categorizing of different gambling groups. Then recently, Romania let drop a complete advertising ban. And they've got now a watershed, so a prohibition during the day for advertising. And this is right now very popular across Europe. We've got bans in Italy, we've got watershed in Germany, in Spain, in Portugal. Belgium will introduce a kind of prohibition already. Holland will prohibit the untargeted advertising. We all know if we have a regulated market, we need advertising to channel customers towards the regulated offer. So why is it then so popular to now try to ban as much as possible from regulated advertising even?
In Romania, we will have next year general elections. And politicians, which are short in social, economical programs, they immediately can catch the general public attention by banning something, and gambling advertising is on the top of their list. So they immediately can gather some votes if they advocate ban advertising, or even worse, completely ban gambling. That's why during the pre-election period, each time we see some crazy ideas. Just to be very short, in my opinion, when you ban something, it's like declaring that you are not able to regulate. So I'm not able to regulate, therefore I will ban it. I will kindly ask Bill to tell us something about prohibition in US, if it's necessary to remind you what happened during the 20s and the 30s last century with the prohibition. Exactly the same thing will happen if somebody will try to ban gambling or ban even advertising, because operators, and especially the unregulated operators, are very active. They do not care about banning advertising by the authorities. They will have the online instrument, which is very hard to control, if it's not impossible, so they can advertise freely. And the single hit market will be the licensed operator, which is paying taxes, which is taking care of the customers.
So to wrap it up, it's a pure political decision if operators do it, and it goes also hand in hand with what Bill said. Of course, certain trends are picked up by other regulators simply because it's popular. In this regard, there's another popular measure right now, and it's categorizing gambling groups. For instance, there are a lot of restrictions already for 18 to 25-year-olds. Holland has introduced this interesting measure. Spain recently approved such a very detailed decree which says exactly that, for instance, players who lose more than 600 euros in 3 weeks are not allowed anymore to use credit cards, and under 25-year-old who lose more than 200 euros are not allowed to use credit cards. So very, very detailed. But also other countries, even the UK already discussed it, Austria discussed it, and you always see a kind of wave. Someone picks it up and finds that a brilliant idea, the other follows suit. On the one hand, I find it corresponds a little bit to this individual approach of responsible gambling, but it's not really individual, because who says that all 18 to 25 years old should be better protected? It's, as we already learned, and there is evidence for that, it's a real individual thing how to best protect players. So is this really useful? Is it not a real intrusion into the private sphere? And I just want to mention also the affordability checks, which are discussed in the UK, and the industry already even commissioned studies to show users won't accept that. Who wants to disclose, who wants a private due diligence only to gamble?
A couple of thoughts. First of all, piggybacking on what Dan said on advertising, every ad in the US is pre-approved by the regulators. You cannot do an ad without it, number one. Number two, other than one issue, and I saw a lot of heads agreeing with me, I don't really like that. I want you to kind of bump up against me, so I'm gonna say something, hopefully that maybe you don't agree with, but I believe in my heart. One thing America really needs to focus on and ban are assault weapons. What happened just on Monday in my home country in Nashville, Tennessee, where 3 young kids and 3 teachers were shot, has a lot to do with government's inability to regulate guns. We're the only nation that has this huge proliferation of assault weapon violence. I mean, think about that. Now, let's dial it back to responsible gaming and banning things. It's axiomatic, don't you think? If I didn't know any better, I would think that Bodog and Bovado are trying to hire people like me to advocate for advertising bans, because they're the beneficiaries. I think it's a real shame when a society has to ban hospitality. This is not a gun, it's hospitality. And we should be able to not use gambling as a coping mechanism, as many people do with drugs and alcohol. But there are many other things in life that are not healthy, and I could think of a dozen. Are we gonna ban them? It's almost like, in my opinion, our argument should be government, you're throwing up your hands. You failed. That's why it's important to work collaboratively. And the issue you asked me about is categorizing. Yes, I think it creeps into privacy, but I think we should provide as much data and get as much data as possible, and we shouldn't necessarily discriminate based on certain data points. I'll tell you something else. In America, I'm not gonna judge the rest of the world, but I know it like the back of my hand. The majority of this industry is made up of men. We don't have a lot of data that represents the community on women because the industry doesn't cater to women. That's disgusting. Not because it's the right thing to do, which I believe it is, diversity and inclusion. It's the commercially responsible thing to do. So we're gonna have data that is really prejudiced because we don't have a representative sample. It's brilliant. I'll tell you one thing, I know I struck a chord when I said what I said to you earlier in a casino in Las Vegas, when all the execs came up to me at the end, Bill, we're paying for you to tell people that we treat gambling addicted customers as VIPs? I said, well, you're not paying me to say that, but it's the truth. Yeah, we know it's the truth, but you shouldn't say it. That's a problem. So, listen, it's clear because I've seen the data in multiple jurisdictions like Australia and the UK in particular, that veterans and people in the military are very vulnerable to certain addictions, and this is one of them. But what we can't do is hurt people who are law-abiding citizens, who are not using gaming as a coping mechanism, who are not gambling addicted customers, because once we start to do that, this is true. I'm gonna say it 10 more times probably. It drives people to the black market where we have no monitoring. Final point, and you said I could share this, and I will. If he was here, he wouldn't be happy. But that's okay, I'm very proud of my children. My oldest boy came with me to Australia for the first time, his first time, last year. He's general counsel in the US for an Australian gaming company called Bet Makers. And Billy Pasquale IV, BP4, IV we call him, Roman numeral, came back from Oz and he called me up. He's not living with me at home, you know, he's emancipated. He said, "Dad, I hope you're not mad at me." I said, "Why?" He said, "Dad, I had a little bit of a problem, but so, you know, what a dad is thinking. Oh my God, did he get somebody pregnant? Did he wreck the car? DUI? Did he get arrested?" "Dad, I realized when I got back from Australia," because he was in the pokies every day, playing, and then he came home and started gambling online with the pokies. He said, "Dad, I realized I had a problem. I won 27,000 US dollars, brought it back into the country, blew it, and then started blowing it. So I put myself on the self-exclusion list in New Jersey." I said, "Bill, that's great. I'm proud of you, son." I said, "But you realize," and he's a gaming attorney, "you realize all you got to do is go across the bridge to Philly or across the bridge to New York and you can gamble. Isn't that a crime? Why aren't the regulators focused on that?" You know why? It's our fault. Because we got to educate them. They don't even know what a self-exclusion list is. But Billy said to me, "Gee, that's a good point. Should I go to every state in the nation and put myself on a self-exclusion list? Isn't that a crime? Isn't that simple?" And you know what the regulators say? "Oh, that can never happen. There's privacy issues." Well, we also have issues of First Amendment rights, and advertising comes under that. So there's got to be a more elegant solution. Thank you.
And that summarizes pretty well that we need in the online gambling world definitely rules that are universally applied. Otherwise, they don't make a lot of sense. And we run out of time. Just a last question to Dan. And this goes also in the direction of education. I'm personally very convinced that exactly this example, that people are self-responsible, that they know where to look for help, what to do in case of problems, is the best prevention for problematic gambling behavior. However, we see now more and more regulators also realizing we need to campaign responsible gambling behavior via messages. For instance, the UK Gambling Commission lately had the slogan, "Take time to think." Other regulators do also this type of campaigns. But what I'm asking myself, is it really education, those responsible gambling messages? Is it not also a kind of hidden advertising? And do you agree that education, the informed choice, should be one of our key goals when it comes to responsible gambling?
Very shortly, informed choices, prevention, education, these are the keys for bringing down problem gamblers and addiction, one thing. And the second one, very shortly, wherever I see this play responsible or be responsible or take your time or something like this, it's like get drunk responsibly. It's completely useless. It's yes, and I in one conference, I think was also with Zoltan, it came up a very interesting idea to give incentives to players which are actively using RG tools like time limits, like bet limits, like total amount of losses. And I think this is a direction we should go over, not by telling them be careful, because don't tell me I'm careful, I don't need your advice on this. This is very shortly, because we're
and I think
right.
you summarized extremely well what are the key points when it comes to responsible gambling. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
And thank you, Zoltan.